In 2016, Lia began training to succeed where 19 others have failed, to be the first person, not woman, to row 5,500 miles solo and unsupported, land to land, from Japan to San Francisco. Last year, Lia rowed half this distance and became the second woman to row the Pacific from San Francisco to Hawaii, a crossing which took 87 days and broke 2 world records. Lia is passionate about creating educational resources for children and inspiring women, girls and boys, to dream beyond their limitations. A number of the club at West Point members have made significant contributions to her in-production documentary of her amazing 87-day row from San Francisco to Hawaii. And so we were able to secure her for a private speaking engagement for our club. After the documentary is done, we hope to have her back again. We would be so thrilled. And to get a viewing there and to see her again. And with that, we'd like all of us to welcome Lia Ditton.
Am I in the camera? Do you need the mic?
Action.
Okay. So in March 2023, I will depart from Choshi, Japan, on a mission to row 5,500 miles. Shall I wait for the car? Yeah, just a second. After the car is gone. 5,500 in the car.
You gotta get it in gear first.
It's raining.
Gotta get it in gear first.
Okay, I'll start again.
Sure.
So in March 2023, I will depart from Choshi, Japan, on a mission to row 5,500 miles solo and unsupported across the Pacific Ocean to the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco. 19 attempts have been made to row this distance. 2 were successful. Both men. Both towed the last 20 and 50 miles to land, respectively. So if I succeed, I will not only be the first woman to row the North Pacific, but the first person to row land to land. But I didn't grow up dreaming of rowing oceans. In fact, I grew up wanting to be an artist. I was very passionate about sculpture in particular. I went to art school in London. And then around the year 2000, art became very conceptual. It shifted from making to the idea of making. And I became quite disillusioned with art. So as part of my degree, they said you could write a program and go to another country to learn some kind of art in that country, like Baroque art in Cuba, for example. But this is one of those things in the prospectus they don't really need you to do. So anyway, I was like, I'm going to go to India. I'm going to go back to the beginnings of sculpture and learn to carve stone. So age 19, I went to India to learn to carve stone and discovered that where they chip these Ganesh statues with the elephant, that they're using kids, and, their arms are like different proportions, and they're really, I wasn't going to learn much from them except for child exploitation. So I decided to travel. And to recover from India, I told my parents, their mum and dad, I'm going to recover in Thailand. And in Thailand, I stumbled on the Phuket King's Cup Yacht Regatta, and I volunteered. And after the regatta, they were looking for crew on some of these boats to take the yachts back to Australia, New Zealand, Cape Town, Europe. And this was an adventure I decided that my 21-year-old self could not pass up. So I sailed back across the Indian Ocean and up the Red Sea, stopping at 10 different countries, not on one of the racing boats. Next audio interruption from outside. Is someone playing basketball? That's all right. So, I went on a cruising boat up the Red Sea, and along the way we met various other cruisers, and they said, Lia, if you like sailing, you need to go to the Caribbean and experience the trade winds. I never heard of the trade winds. But if enough people tell you when you're 21 that you should go to the Caribbean, you start thinking, I should go to the Caribbean. Except this wasn't the era of cheap flights that it is now. I never thought that I would go to the Caribbean in my lifetime. A flight from the UK was 2,000 or 3,000 back in 2000. Hard to even remember that now. But somehow or other, like the timing was right, that if you chose a flight at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday, I wrote an algorithm to figure out when was the cheapest flight. And I went one way to New York just after 9/11 because I decided it was never a safer time to fly and nobody wanted to go to New York. So I flew to America and then went back down to the Caribbean and hitchhiked on boats up to North America. And along the way I learned that there was an industry called the marine industry, and that if I had enough experience, people would pay me money to work on boats. Wicked. Correction, if you're a woman, people pay you money to clean boats and to cook on boats. They don't actually want you to drive them. So around the time of the Iraqi war, there were all the boats were grounded, and I managed to get a spot on a race boat, but it didn't happen straight away. So all of the boats around this time, early 2002, 2003, had a no-girl rule on most of these boats. There were no women allowed on race boats. So I was in the Caribbean and I went between boat to boat and they said, would you make the sandwiches for the regatta? And by the time the fourth boat asked me to make sandwiches, I was like, right, I need to start a company that makes sandwiches, outsource this so I can go racing. Lesson 101, never start your first company in the Caribbean. That's a whole story in itself, but the net result was I made hundreds of sandwiches before sunrise. But I ended up on Rosebud because they were nervous about getting the sandwiches in time. They were located across the lagoon, so they said, yes, we'll take you racing because it happens that the wind forecast is strong and we need some extra ballast. So I turn up with my sandwiches and I'm ballast. And in the course of that regatta, they discover that I can pack spinnakers. So I become the downstairs rat of packing spinnakers. And I managed to hang on in this team for the whole season, doing 3 jobs, I might add. So in the morning, I made sandwiches for 18 people. These are hungry people, so that's 36 sandwiches. And then I packed 5 spinnakers in the day, and then I went back and I cooked dinner for 18 people. And that was only possible because the owner of Rosebud was Roger Sturgeon, who created the SIM card. He's based in Santa Cruz. And his brother would rent a bus and drive us all around. And his brother used to shop for marathons. So he said, give me your list so you can go racing and I'll do your shopping. And that's how we made it work. But at the end of the season, I felt that I should be paid a little bit more than $200. And I don't know, I look back and think maybe I should have just stayed on and done 3 jobs for little money and not made a stand, because on Rosebud I learned how to win. Now this team was really serious about winning. The entire team flew in 10 days before the start of the regatta, and for those 10 days everybody woke up at the time of the regatta and was on the water at the time of the gun. And for the duration of that day we drilled everything. Start, 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 spinnacle, spinnacle, drops, drops, drops. I mean, by the time the actual race started, I was like, oh my god, we're racing, I get to sit on the rail. But that's how you win. And they had a coach, and at the end of the day we had a debrief, and I learned the formula for success. But at the end of that season, I did have a moment where I realized that in the next 5 years, I could be packing spinnakers and making sandwiches unless I moved away from that arena. And around that time, there was a woman in the UK called Ellen MacArthur, and she had just sailed single-handed around the world. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it all myself. So I did. So I went back to art school, and I said to my art school, I said, I'm going to come back, but I'm going to enter this race across the Atlantic as a performance artwork. And then I'm going to reenact it outside the university as my final show. And they're like, yeah. But then I did it. So I managed to charter this boat because it was in the corner of a yard and it had been flipped backwards. So sweat equity got me the charter. And I didn't have any money. I was a student with a student loan. So my philosophy was I would call every single company for the thing that I needed. And if I would just go through the list of all the companies that made that thing. And sure enough, there were about 50 sponsors at the end that provided every single item, including electricity to make the painting. I lived in somebody's loaned caravan. It was a full-on community project by the end of it. And in fact, the caravan started to get mail. So this tiny little caravanette thing was dropped off in the shipyard, and I started to get mail addressed to small caravan in the corner. And then the milkman dropped off milk by then. It was getting a little out of hand. But what goes across must come back. So I sailed the boat across to Newport, Rhode Island, and I was the youngest woman, the only woman, and the youngest competitor to finish. But I had to bring the boat back because I borrowed it. And I get halfway across and people start to get really scared because there is a hurricane in the South Atlantic and her name was Katrina. And you should have seen my little tracker dot. It moved so fast towards the Azores High. This was the advice we were given, is I should basically park up in this area of no wind until the storm went by. Because if it had followed the usual trajectory of a hurricane, there's no way I would have survived, let alone in a boat with 2 armors trying around. So anyway, I get back to art school. No one believed I had actually done it, which was very annoying. And because what do you have to show for it? A little dot on a map, you know? And some sunburn, maybe, if you're not clever. So that boat went back to its original owner, and I chartered another boat that I then put outside the university. But the university had moved location while I was at sea, and they moved to the next door to the Tate Britain Gallery, which means it created a huge logistical challenge for me to get the boat in there. Because in front of the gallery, I don't know if you've been to London, is a 4-way, what they call a strategic highway. Yeah. And to close that road is £40,000 just to close it. So we needed to, some serious head scratching went on. It's like, how do you get a boat that's 40 feet long by 40 feet wide into the central London, like next to Westminster? And we ended up using a slipway next to MI6. And I had to ask MI6 if they could take off their cameras, because there were some cameras that were dangling over into the slipway. But the slipway was owned by London Duck Tours, one of those amphibious vehicles. And they didn't care. They just didn't think I'd ever get permission from MI6 to go within their 30-meter exclusion zone. I didn't even know how you get a meeting with MI6 to discuss getting a special permission to go within the exclusion zone. Because I turn up at the door and I get like turned away by guys with guns. I'm like, okay.
You should call M.
That's how now MI6 has a website, but they didn't then, so I had no idea. But anyway, so one day I'm there with a tape measure, measuring, to see if we can actually take this trimaran out the water and figure out how to get it across the river. And the minute you turn up with a tape measure next to MI6, people popped out of that building, like in suits, like the Men in Black. And I was like, oh my God, it's so great to see you. I've been trying to get in touch with you. And that's how I got my meeting with a guy from MI6. And we met in a cafe of all places, and my friends were very excited about this meeting. And suddenly I had my friend Andy, who was now head of media, and my friend Claire, like this was all fake of course. They wanted to come to this meeting, so my whole friends with all these pseudo titles for this thing, and we were giving the MI6 estate manager a hard time about his plaid socks and whether his pencil propelled, like other gentlemen movie. Anyway, he positively skipped out of that meeting, and then I realised that he fancied my friend Claire. And that's how I got my special dispensation with MI6.
It works, right?
It works. Sometimes it works in your favour. Yeah. Anyway, so we still had an issue, is how do you get this boat across the river? But I got, the crane driver actually came up with it, and he said, well, there are rules for width, and there are rules for length, but there are no rules for height. So this is exactly what we did.
you turn it on its
We
side.
turned it on its side, 85 degrees to the vertical, trucked it in the middle of the night with a police escort over the bridge towards the university. And there's the escort vehicle arriving a little late to the party. But look at the scale. So now we have a London bus in a minute. There's the bus. There's the scale of the boat. The university, when that turned up, got the shock of their lives. Why they did keep underestimating my ability to pull things off, you know? We have a boat in the courtyard. I've been telling you for weeks we're going to have a boat in the courtyard. There's a boat in the courtyard! Anyway, so I passed my degree. They decided that they would give me a first because I stayed on the boat for the duration of the crossing. So, in effect, the reenactment was transatlantic. So we did a live stream, which was pretty avant-garde at that time, and very bitty. It was like every 5 seconds. But we streamed it to a gallery in New York. So I lived on the boat, ate the same crap food, and had a composting toilet, whole story in its own right, that one, in the boat. So I did not get off for 28 days in central London next to the Tate Britain. I became part of the artwork, which was a truly wacky, weird, and lonely experience. And I would climb the mast for something to do, and that would be a sort of spectator moment, you know. But there are about 1,000 people a day in total came to see the exhibition. It was, you know, a little out there. Anyway, so the next thing was I decided to do the Route du Rhum, which is France's most prestigious single-handed race. It's from St. Malo in northern France to Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. And the reenactment outside the Tate had a buzz around it for a short time, and I decided to capitalize on that by going, okay, I'm going to enter this race, but after the race, I'm going to slice the boat in half. So I'm going to take a 40-foot race boat and slice it straight down the middle, mast, keel, the whole thing, into 2 giant half hulls. And while I'm doing the race, I'm going to write my diary on the inside so that when it's displayed, there'll be a ladder up to read the diary of that actual experience. And I sold the shares to the company in 4 days. Wicked! Because as a race boat, it was worth about 90,000. As art, it was worth 400,000. Because it's a touring exhibit of that scale is sort of rented out. And at that moment, I had a name in art. Unfortunately, never comes to plan, does it? While I was doing the race, one of the investors bought out the others and turned up at the end to claim the boat. And then he set sail for New York alone. And he didn't have the experience. The boat was a weapon. It had a canting keel, which means hydraulically the keel goes to the other side, which also meant that hydraulically the keel could be on the wrong side and the mast would go into the water like a dinghy. And it was wildly above his skill level. And he ended up abandoning ship, getting off onto a cruise ship, and the cruise ship hooked the mast from the top deck and dismasted the boat, and the boat was never seen again.
Oh, no.
But at that time, in a way, it was a huge blessing, because bear in mind the diary was written on the inside of that. And that felt like a huge liability that somebody had basically taken not only the boat, but the diary, and was now going to present it to, under my name, to these art galleries. So it was sort of lost at sea. It's another story. Anyway, we move on. I go and get a job, because what else are you going to do after that? And I get a job running the boat from the film Waterworld with Kevin Costner. So I don't know if you saw that movie. It was around 2004. It was a really terrible movie.
Which one?
I like it.
Waterworld.
Waterworld.
Yeah.
It was a good movie.
It was
It was a good movie. Prophetic.
There were a lot of
It was
continuity
underwater
errors.
for the very
Anyway, I had to watch the movie to figure out what all the junk was in the container, because the owner bought the set basically from Hollywood. So anyway, we did the Transpac to Hawaii that in 2007. And here is a clip from the Transpac.
How fast are we ready to go?
22 knots. I had a record. Which was slightly problematic, being the only woman and the fastest driver on a boat. Be very careful with that one. Anyway, around 2008, along comes the financial crisis to ruin my plans. And so most boats at that time were being mothballed, or they were run by skeleton crew, and if you had a race boat, you couldn't necessarily be seen to be using it. And I, at the time, was the business development manager of a marine electronics company, at a time when, frankly, there was no business to develop. And I felt I had died and gone to an office. I laughingly called it my desk sentence. Anyway, in the middle of all that, I got a phone call from a Danish Olympic rower, there she is, Lisa, asking me to row the Atlantic. Now, your expression is probably how I felt at the time. I was like, row? You know, we sail, we go as fast as possible across oceans. And we don't row. I was like, I have no muscles, I've never rowed. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll go to Copenhagen, I'll meet her. That'll be a fun weekend. So I go to Copenhagen, and she's, you know, full-on Olympian, but I also realise it's not going to work, because she's Danish. She wants me to move to Denmark, refit her boat. And I said, but I don't speak Danish. What if we don't get a sponsor? Oh, well, we just, you know, do it another year. Wait, no. If I move to Denmark and refit your boat, you need to be prepared to sell your left kidney, or I'm not moving to Denmark. So I get back to the UK, and at the time I was living in Bristol behind IKEA. So I thought, I will build a boat. Worst idea ever, right? And thankfully I didn't. I did buy the kit to build the boat, but it never got built because this guy fell out with his partner 4 days before the start of the race across the Atlantic. And my friend Margaret thought it was a really good idea for me to row with him. It took me about halfway to figure out why he had fallen out with his partner.
There were reasons.
And the main lesson from the whole row was really learning to think before I spoke and then never speak at all. An amazing skill I wish I had retained. Poor Nick had never even flown to America, and I was like, oh my God, you must feel like Christopher Columbus discovering the new world. I mean, the idea, the distance, if you've never actually got on a plane to fly to America. Anyway, we arrived in Antigua after 74 days at sea, and then we never spoke again, which is unfortunate, because probably if we had, I may not be doing what I'm doing now. There was something very unfinished about that experience. Ultimately, I surprised myself with how much I liked it. The oars felt like extensions of my arms. I could feel the ocean. It had a texture. When there was no wind at all, I used to have to cut the water surface and rip the oars through the water. But when there was some wind and waves, the rowing felt light and fluffy, and some nights it was like rowing through silk. And the patterns that you start to notice on the waves, I hadn't really spent time to look at them as a sailor. You know, you could see shifts before the wind changed. We called them the change waves. We had terminology that we created. And you know, I felt kind of wild and free out there in a way I hadn't necessarily whizzing across on high-speed boats. But it was time to go back and get another job, and this time I was asked to be the boat captain. So there's a difference between a captain and a boat captain. A captain of a huge vessel like this needs almost a pilot license. So I was the boat captain. I had to make sure everything worked. And the boat of which I was the captain was Planet Solar, which is a 110-foot solar-powered catamaran that was commissioned by a German businessman to prove that it was possible to go around the world with solar energy alone. But he never stepped foot in the boat, and so the boat had like IKEA furniture inside, which was truly weird. And my parents were delighted that, because we never really went further than 5 miles offshore. But what they didn't realise, what I was doing was running a power station that had 836 solar panels on deck and 110 tons of lithium batteries. And here's a clip from that boat.
Wow.
That's coming into New York.
Yes. What year is this?
This is 2015. So I had a pretty wicked sense of imposter syndrome running that, I have to say. And terrified of parking it. I mean, it's like parking a tennis court. However, the pilot that they employed to be my, captain, and so I'm driving. When we park it, I'm driving with no visibility, zero, and the pilot is walking around the deck with a radio, giving commands. It's completely blind, and then the other crew are down on the sponsons giving information about clearance for the solar panels.
I guess some cameras were too heavy to mount on all corners or something.
Yeah, they're overhanging cameras, yeah. So the pilot, of course, that they hired is Gerard Dabble, none other than the first man to row from Japan, which was really interesting, because that's what I wanted to do next. And I felt like I had been sent to do an apprenticeship with the master. So here we are on a very rare no-wind day, where Vincent, who is the chef, had overcooked the apple tart, as you can see that. And in true French style, priority is given to eating, so much that we have turned the boat downwind to eat. And
But
we
of
don't
course.
even have to, because the controllers back in Switzerland are also French, we don't even have to explain that. They just see this little donut on the track and go, ah, they are eating. And so we erected, usually we ate downstairs, but you see we have wine. I mean, who drinks on delivery? I didn't drink. I don't have a glass. Not blowing my cover, but yeah, you're drinking on a 110-foot power station. Anyway, that's very French. It was quite fun. Anyway, so here is the route that Gerard had rowed, Japan to San Francisco, and after working on Planet Solar, I thought, right, that's what I'm going to do next. And why I was particularly interested in this section of ocean is because, firstly, 17 people had failed. Why? But as you can see from this topography map, is that the Pacific is divided into a west and an east basin, and what dissects it is the Hawaiian Islands and its underwater mountain range called Emperor Seamount. So you have, the challenge here is the current. So you have the Kuroshio current, this Gulf Stream-like warm current of about 4.5 knots. And you need to ride that, and that ends around the time of Hawaii. So that's your first challenge, because that's a cauldron when you have really strong weather. It's hot, it's like Gulf Stream, you've got to get out of it. But it's also a free ride, it's fast. And then the second part of it is just time. You need to get to North America before winter kicks in. And in 2016, an early part of this boat got abandoned in the Atlantic, and I thought, that's my boat. No one is going to buy a boat that has been abandoned at sea and washed up in Ireland. And sure enough, it needed tons of work, but I was prepared to do that rather than spend a lot of money on a boat. I didn't know what the right boat was, so why build a boat from scratch when you don't know what to build? So I bought an older boat and I started to refit it. And then I moved to San Francisco, because the bay is like an ocean in a bowl. I thought, I can row here all year round, and I can row every which way without needing a support boat. But all the people I met kept saying, when are you going outside the Golden Gate Bridge? And I was like, oh, I'm kind of terrified of that. I said, how are you going to row across an ocean if you're terrified of going outside? And oh, go outside again, say go. Anyway, by the time of a year and a half, I had rowed 1,000 miles in the bay itself. But each one of the gate exits was an experience. So in the early part of 2017, I joined a sailboat that went out to the Farallones. I don't know if you know this, but there are volunteers who deliver food to the scientists living on the Farallones.
There's one of the members here that does it.
Cool.
And it's got a,
It's well worth
Richard.
jumping on board.
yeah.
I have the record for being the person to get shat on by a bird the fastest on a once arriving on the island. I literally stepped foot and it shat on my head. And they said that's a record. Usually it takes a few minutes longer than that. Anyway, as I'm going out there, I learned from the scientists that no one has rowed to or from the Farallones since 1892, in the era of the lighthouse keeper. I thought, aha, the gauntlet was laid down. And so in April that year, I rowed out towards the Farallones. I'm 2.5 miles out here, and I'm thinking, I'll be back. No big deal. Yeah. So for my second attempt, I was at a cocktail party. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't get invited to cocktail parties, but I happened to be at a cocktail party, and the editor of the San Francisco Chronicle was there, and I was saying, I'm going to run up to the Farallones, no one's done it since the Lighthouse Keeper. And they said, this is a great local story, we're going to be all over this. And I thought, great, I could do with some publicity, I need a sponsor. And I learnt one of my first lessons, is that the wind and tide and timing doesn't line up to 6 a.m. on a set Tuesday, as you all know well. And of course, on said Tuesday, I opened the curtain in the kitchen, and of course the marine layer is in. I know, it's a bust. But I decided to go through with it. Thought the publicity's good, the photographer's booked, how bad can it be? Anyway, I go out through the gate, and I tell myself, you're going to learn something today, even if you don't get the Farallones. Sure enough, I did. So I come back in on the next tide, and as I come in through the gate, my phone blows up. I am front and back of the San Francisco Chronicle that day. There's even some local radio station discussing whether I'm out there rowing naked. And, and I thought, Lia, why did you do that to yourself? How humiliating. You knew you couldn't succeed today. Why did you do that? And so I'm and people are sailing by me, and suddenly everybody knows my name, and I'm feeling the weight of that failure. And I row up to the San Francisco Yacht Club, and there's a family waiting for me. This happens sometimes, my boat's crazy coloured pattern. But there's a family with young children waiting for me, and I'm thinking, not today. Please not. Hang on, wait, I actually got another thing. So, when you're having a bad day when this happens. This is me rowing back up the bay. Oh yes, your favourite hat. Always the favourite hat.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Anyway, so I get to the yacht club, and there's a small family, and the mother gives her daughter a nudge, and she comes forward, and she has a note. And the mother explained that they had read about me in the paper, they had been following the tracker, and the 6-year-old wanted to meet me. And she hands me this note, and it says, to Lia from Brooklyn, and inside it says, I admire you for trying. You will do it next time. Hot note. And I was reminded in that moment of some of the impact that these sort of things have. Because up until that point, that girl probably didn't know that there were people like me doing things like this in crazy coloured boats like that. And I just sort of blew open the doors of possibility. And this happens again and again. I found notes tucked in my windshield of my car from little children. I've had necklaces stuffed in the corner of my boat. It's, and it makes it worthwhile. Anyway, so after the Farallon failure too, did not succeed. Brooklyn was not right. I did not succeed on the next time. And so I set my sights on rowing down the coast. So I left at 2:30 in the morning, head out the gate, wrestled off the continental shelf down to Santa Barbara, and we made a film about that, which was the first one we made. I took a GoPro and shot some film, and that's on YouTube if you want to watch it. But this is where we started to make films, and we started to get them picked up by film festivals. And so, in a way, the road down to Santa Barbara, which was a whole set of dramas in its own right, in a way kind of qualified me to do the Farallons. And I realised that I had the wrong time of year, that September, October, when the shift of the weather was going to enable me to get out there. And really, fire weather is the best way, because it goes out, then you want it to stop so you can come back in. But it was a 4-day epic with as many hours as I could row in a day. So I realised the power that I had to reach small children, and I wanted to do something more significant with that, other than just talking to children on a random basis. And I got an amazing amount of funding, 35 grand, to create this impressive education program for 4 to 11-year-olds in the UK and the US. But we needed a distribution partner. How do you get it to the children? How do you get it into schools? So I partnered with Twinkle, which that's exactly what they do. A lot of schools know Twinkle and they download stuff. And so last year when COVID hit, and I'm thinking, this is the moment, following me going across an ocean while everyone's stuck at home. But of course Twinkle couldn't cope. They were downloading, parents were downloading, and the whole thing never happened, which is to be fixed next time. Anyway, fully embracing this kid magnet thing that was going on with this program, I asked Wes Archer, who was one of the original animators of The Simpsons, if he would design characters that would feature on my boat. And so these characters all have names and characteristics. In fact, I asked him, were they born with names? Do I name them? He's like, they have names. I'm like, okay. There's Bobby Octobubble. There's Neil, the real deal seal. This is the wobblefish. Doesn't exist in life. That's the salty sea star, tapioca turtle, and Ellie jellyfish, and the superfly fish. It's one of my favorites. So the next trip was from Portland down the river all the way down to San Francisco, 750 miles. It ended up being 24 days at sea. Now, the reason, the importance of this trip was that those two men who had succeeded got towed to land. And one of them ended up in the other side of the Columbia River Bar, off Cape Disappointment, which I think he would have enjoyed the irony. And the second guy came into Coos Bay in Oregon. And I wanted to know why both men aimed for San Francisco and ended up in Oregon. What happened? And sure enough, I found out. Around here, there is a northbound current going up here. And even the Oregon State University that study these things did not know about that. And that is exactly why they ended up there. So what I learned is to succeed coming in from Japan, you have to cut that wide. If you come in too far, I too am going Cape Disappointment. So I had every intention of fishing on my trip down from Oregon. In fact, as I went down the Columbia River, every fisherman I met said, no, those are the wrong lures, you need these lures. I had so many lures by the end of the time I got to the river, so I was well set up to fish. Day one, this happens. Oh yeah. Now look how close that is to me at this point. Wait a second. There's my boat.
Oh wow.
Are you in the river or?
Out to sea, yeah. So we have a new problem. How do you sleep with a shark under your bed? How on earth do you go to sleep with sharks under your bed? For days! And I would talk to myself. I'd go, Lia, you're doing very well with the sharks. You're coping so well. And then I'd accidentally knock the oar and I'd be like, ah! And I'd clean the teeth at night and I'd go, I'm sorry about the toothpaste juice. It's Tom's from Maine. Maybe you've been to Maine. There's sharks in Maine. I'm like talking to the sharks. So yeah, there's another short clip from the film we made of that trip. So you can see it's a gorgeous day. I want to go for a swim, but I'm too scared because of the sharks. And sure enough, later in that row, I saw a great white leap out of the water with a seal in its mouth and go back down, and that was the end of my desire to swim. In some ways, at that time, it was like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. There were rainbows to the left and sharks killing things to the right. So finally, this brings us to last year's epic, which is, we called this a training row. It was half the distance, so 2,500 miles from San Francisco to Oahu in Hawaii. And I left, of course, in the middle of COVID, which created a whole new set of problems. For one, everyone was buying all of the long life food that I needed for my trip. And when I tried to buy it, of course, I looked like the worst kind of hoarder. I mean, second to the toilet paper thing, stockpiling dried goods was criminal at that point. And then California put limits on the amount that you could buy, and so you had to keep shopping from all these different outlets. No one could help you pack. Anyway, finally I leave. But right before I put my boat in the water, I got some news. And several months earlier, a Chinese rower had tried to row from San Francisco to China. And this was his third attempt. And I jokingly called him Captain Calamity in his quest for China, because each time he had some mishap and ended up getting rescued. But this time, he was not so fortunate. And he was upside down off the Marshall Islands, alive. They saw him on his boat. But when the Coast Guard flew back 2 days later, he was nowhere to be seen. And his parents contacted me, asking me to continue the search after it had been called off, which is a terrible position that you never want to be in, especially with contacted by somebody's parents. And so I spoke to the Coast Guard commander who had cut off the search and said, "Did you look inside the boat?" If it were me, I would swim back inside the boat. What other shelter have you got? Incidentally, he did not take a life raft. Criticisms aside, they did not check inside the boat. And of course, the day I launched my boat, May 1st, I think it was, 2020, his boat washes up in the Philippines with his body inside.
Oh.
What a huge blow that was to me. Do I go? I'm living in my boat, ready to leave myself. Oh, goodness. Anyway, I convinced myself if I can just get out to sea, I will go into my sea mode and I will be fine. 2 weeks later, another rower dies. And this was a woman who had set off before me to also do this particular record. And it's like, what is wrong with 2020? But a lot of things, you know. And then after that, I capsized. And I'm going to go into that in a minute. So we're making a film about this because somebody sponsored me with a whole slew of GoPro 8s, which at the time was like the best camera, and I used them. And Discovery Channel were my media partner, and for them I did every day a sort of video diary, which isn't really something I'm familiar with, but I found myself doing it, almost with reckless abandon, like completely saying what was happening, without a filter. I mean, bear in mind, we're living in COVID land and 2 people have just died, and I just felt they had nothing to lose. And so you end up with this incredibly real, vulnerable, raw footage, which, thanks to Winston and to others, decided that this needs to be made into a film. So I have for you a 3-minute film pitch. It's not the actual trailer of the film, it's what we put together in order to persuade the musicians to give us the music, to pitch the discovery, and to find funding. So it's not the trailer. Oh, hang on. Wait. Let's go to the film first.
Leaving was hard because another rower had died before I left, and then 2 or 3 weeks in, another rower died. And I was like, really, I should turn back. Like, that was a lot to digest. And then after that, I capsized. I massively underestimated the psychological impact of nearly drowning. Just trying to find a way forward. These seas came out kind of nowhere. When the boat rolled the second time, I was asleep, and then thrown because I carried woke to a lot of water coming in, not knowing if I could get out. I have to decide really if this boat is safe. Why do I want to do this? And why am I driven to do this? In a way, this project has been about being comfortable with my past as I forge into the future. My grandmother had always told me that I was a Madonna of my own life, that I had the power in my fingertips to reinvent myself.
So yeah, a huge thank you to the club at West Point for to helping me fund that. We're now $8,000 from reaching funding on the film, so just a huge thank you for that. And now we're in an interesting position with the film because we need to fund it privately in order to retain the integrity of the film. And we've had meetings with Discovery and Cineflix about streaming it, but they want to actually take it and make it their own with reenactments of the capsizes. And what we have in mind here is sort of an art piece in its own right. And Danielle, who's the filmmaker that I'm making it with, her vision is to have the screenings, the first screening or second, with that live orchestra. And it would be fabulous to do that in some way in this club, because it would just be so moving. Anyway, I'm writing a book at the moment to figure out really what the hell happened through that whole trip to Hawaii. And part of that is because, as you saw, after the second capsize, the boat actually wasn't safe to continue. And even though I added water ballast to the boat, many times it started to go into that role. And I've spent several months earlier this year figuring out why, what went wrong. But psychologically, I spent 30 days in a state where I knew I could get capsized again. And shifting my mind out of that has taken time. But I have recommitted to continuing. I may be crazy, but part of that is really processing what happened. So I'm going to read you, this is a total privilege, this is not shown or seen to anyone. And again, in the same way of the integrity of the film, I have pushed off my agent and the respected publishers in order to write the whole book before it gets turned into something else. So this is the first chapter of the book, and the book is called Dancing with Death, which makes me roll my eyes at the melodrama and definitely needs a different title. But that title, Dancing with Death, came to me listening to a podcast where the interviewee was the big wave surfer, Laird Hamilton. And when he said Dancing with Death, that just hit something. It hit something of the first capsize. And immediately, and for the first time, I just saw the book. And I couldn't wait to write it. In fact, sometimes I'd rather not make lunch, I just keep writing it. So this is the first opening part of the book. It's chapter 1, inverted. Close your hand, screamed the voice in my head. The voice had never screamed before. When I surfaced, I fumbled for the safety line around the perimeter of the boat, and when I found the line, the rope lay across my open palm. I stared at the line. I was in the water, no life jacket or tether to the boat. I deleted the line, close your hand. The rest of the blog, written after the first capsize, was pretty matter of fact. The wave broke from such a height, the front curled 3 times. In one glance, I knew the wave was deadly. Don't let go of the boat, I warned myself. The boat was struck, and my body thrown head first into darkness, one arm hooked intentionally around the rail. Arm in arm, my boat and I danced through the water. When the starboard rail was torn from the inside nook of my elbow, I was surprised by the port rail thrust into the same nook. I surfaced. I remember feeling pleased by the sight of the few barnacles on the upturned hull. Upturned hull. The boat was upside down. The boat was not self-righting. I threw my body at the side of the boat with the speed and force of a parent lifting up a car to save a child. The hull started to roll. I pressed my hands against the underside of the hull. Smooth, nothing to hold on to. I started to fall. For the first time, I felt frightened. I was knocked back underwater. Find a safety line, barked the voice in my head. Close your hand, screamed the same voice. An open palm, a closed palm, the movement of 4 fingers, and a line of text I couldn't bear to read on a page. So, how am I going to build the right boat that doesn't capsize me? So, a couple of years ago I came up with the idea of slicing the boat after I had rowed it. Not because I didn't want to sell it or I actually think, how on earth am I going to slice it psychologically? But I wanted the parts of the boat to go on and have new lives. I wanted it to tell in 60 places the story, not my story as such, but what I think it has come to represent, which is determination, perseverance, and dogged, unwavering perseverance. And so I came up with this idea that we were going to slice the boat up, and that anyone who wanted to own a part of the boat could do so for $5,000, and they would get a certificate of ownership. And this is a Willy Wonka ticket to the Slice private view. It's also how you get your slice. So number 13 is the 13th in line. It's not slice number 13. And my joke is that if perchance the boat gets abandoned and I have to be rescued, you still have a chopping board. So the continuation of the project is thanks to what I have come to call my believers. So in the first year I was heavily sponsored, which came with its own compromises, and in the second year I joined Patreon. It's one of those crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe. And the first people who donated, I called them my believers, because it felt like they stepped into a room, an imaginary room, and said, I believe in you, keep going, I'm with you. And it doesn't matter if someone signs up for $1 or $100 a month to help the continuation of the project. It still felt like people in this imaginary room were with me. And so if you would like to get ongoing updates about the project, behind the scenes, how it's going, who the designer will be, how I'm doing, how I'm training, then sign up as a believer on patreon.com/Rodeo. So the reality is that 17 people failed to row the North Pacific, and I too may not succeed. But if I fail, you will know I did so daring greatly.
I have a question.
Excellent, go ahead.
When you say unsupported, what does that mean exactly?
Okay, so for those on Zoom, the question is, what does unsupported mean in a record? So solo is obviously just me. Unsupported means no support boat. So no one out there except me. Entirely alone.
Wow.
I thought about calling the book Unsupported.
I personally like Dancing with Death.
You do? Not
I
too
do.
melodramatic?
No.
Okay.
Well, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, when you were coming into Honolulu, and you were not, you were followed, but you were not, there was not a support boat.
No.
They were just really, I remember how excited everyone was about you coming in. Oh my gosh, is she going to make it? Is she going to make it, or is she going to bypass it? You know, and it was just the most incredible thing. And well, he was more involved in it every day, because he would get all of your what was it?
Updates and
Yes,
photos
every
and-
Patreon believer.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, it was exciting, and then to actually see it, and see, you know, it was, you were coming in before, at dawn, you know, it wasn't even light yet, quite, and oh my gosh, you know, it was such an exciting thing, and you must have been so exhausted because you almost didn't make that coming in time.
Right. The cue arrival story. Okay.
Right.
Thank you for that. So, 7 a.m. the day before I arrived, I realized I was going to have to row non-stop until I arrived. Because Molokai is here and Oahu is there, and all the conditions were driving me south of the island. And, you know, I don't have a motor. So if I stop rowing, I'm going south of the island. And so, you know, I start at 7 in the morning. You know, there's an aircraft photography thing at 3, you know, the circus began. But as the night went on, the current did the opposite of what I was told. So the current was supposed to, according to the text I got, go northbound. the current went southbound. And so in the early hours of that night, I really had to fight to stay off land. And I wasn't making it. I was going to need a tow. And I thought, seriously? 2 capsizes, 87 days, and we're going to get towed in? No! So I take my ballast water and I just dump it in. I'm like, if we capsize now, we capsize now. But of course, you know, the next thing that happens is the boat just like lifts up into the air. I'm like, oh God, that was a terrible mistake. And crashes back down again. But the only way to keep going 24 hours of rowing without eating, without drinking, without stopping is literally all in your mind. So I was like, all right, we're going to become our own cheerleader. You know, we're going to celebrate the nanos here. You know, so it's like 5 microscopic somethings of a positioning point. You know, and you're like 5, and I'm like 50. And I had these mantras that I just created. And the squall comes, and you're like, wow, squall, just what you need now. So you're like, maintain. I'm rowing, maintain, maintain. I'm fully aware that I'm going to be ripped with blisters, and it's just all out at this point. So I'm like, maintain, maintain, and then the squall goes, and you're like, gain, 50, 100, like I'm just going off in my head. And then I somehow succeed. I kind of creep up to land, I get enough wind shadow, the squall stops, and I'm just sort of spent. You know, and you look at the end, you're going, I'm not sure I can get there. And then I'm sitting on my seat, and there's a knocking sound. It's the ballast water, and it wants to be let out, the rest of it. So I let it out, and I'm like, wow, that's not real. And that's when I thought, okay, I need to eat some food and stand up for a bit, because the light off Diamond Head, I just couldn't, my brain knew that that's land, and I just couldn't do it. I thought, all right, I'm going to have to slow down until mentally I can figure out that little conundrum that I know is easy, but my mind isn't there. And then a little lemon slice of moon arrives. And then I figure out the red line, we're off again. And then a boat arrives, which is the boat that you would have seen start to stream. Yes. Now this is the part that gets funny, because 2 people in the boat, Tim, I know, he's driving, and Kenny has his phone out. It's 3 in the morning. And in my brain, I'm like, what is he doing on his phone at 3 in the morning? And this keeps going. And he's talking to himself. I'm thinking, who is he talking to at 3:30 in the morning? And I'm thinking, maybe he's an author, maybe he's a journalist, maybe he's writing something. 4:30. Why is Tim, who's driving, not think that Kenny talking to himself is weird? And this just going, I had no idea that 45,000 people were watching on the other side of Kenny's phone. Oh, and Kenny downloaded Instagram that morning. and his kids thought he was incredibly cool, because he managed to figure out Instagram. So anyway, that's happening. And so I'm starting to come in, and a small power boat comes down, and with a bank of lights, like squid lights. But no one says anything. No one says hi, nothing. Super surreal. But the lights, and I remember I had paid for that. I'm like, okay, I remember I had paid for camera people at the end, because I have a contract Discovery, and I have to make sure I have the footage. And the light reminds me to set off a flare. Genius. So I set off the flare, but actually, I can't read the instructions. I have rowed for 24 hours. My brain is fried. And I'm thinking, oh, problem. But fortunately, the flare company have 4 rib holes for the fingers. And I'm thinking, thank God. Like, you know, because I wouldn't know which way up this whole thing's supposed to be. And then it's like a dangly cord. I'm like, okay, pull that. So I'm like, all right, we can do this. And then boom, my heart rate just goes ding, 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 ding. Like, I have an alarm for that. It's like ding, 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 ding. And poof. And that gave me enough wherewithal to row in and look half sane. So that was good. That shot of adrenaline was just epic from that flare, and I thought, damn, I should have done this sooner. So I row in, and I'm looking, you know, I'm looking good. Like, you know, I'm rowing, my stroke's not too bad, mostly because I've had the biggest shot of adrenaline from that flare moment. Firstly, the fright of not knowing how to open it, and then secondly, actually opening it. And then I step on land, and there are people I don't know, and they're all dressed up like I'm contagious, but they're trying to protect me because they may have the virus and I don't know, but they're super weird. It's just super weird.
It's good they didn't send you away.
Yeah,
Like in any
you know,
other
they're like
country right
visors
now.
and gloves and stuff, and no one touched me. It's just so strange. And I knew that there would be a doctor and a nurse there, which is, I'll tell this part again. But they dressed up as a doctor and a nurse. Like, so the nurse has blue top with a stethoscope, and the doctor has a white coat, and there's pictures of me, and I'm sitting there going, is this for real? Like, am I dreaming this? Is this performance artwork? And that was, and then I get dropped off at the hotel on the 29th floor. Who thought of that?
You've been quarantining for a little while before that.
On the 29th floor, I mean, like, just going up in an elevator when you've been at sea.
Yes, exactly.
Jesus! Are you going to send me to the moon now? Even DoorDash was too far. How am I going to eat? Rapunzel was at the top of the hotel. The hotel was empty. I'm in an entirely empty hotel on the 29th floor. Who thought of that?
Yeah.
Did they think I needed the ocean view? Horizon view. I'm like, that is so wrong. I'm just going to sit in the bathroom. And then you have another dilemma in the bathroom because you're like, I don't want to get wet. You know? So many problems. And they put a microwave there, which was really kind. And I ended up having a freeze-dried meal one night because I couldn't walk to the elevator to get DoorDash.
Oh.
Just couldn't do it. And I was like, oh, new low.
Oh, no.
You know, I need rescuing from the hotel.
Wow.
So physically, what did you do to recover from that confinement? That was a lot of physical activity in a very confined environment.
Yeah, so the first night, I wake up in the night and I want to use the bathroom. But that's a long way. Bear in mind the bed has been the size of my boat. You know? I'm like, I'm about to make the huge marathon to the bathroom in the night. You know? I wish I documented all of this because it would have been ridiculously funny for everybody else. You know? Oh no, is she gonna make it? In the night. Yoga is what I've been doing. And that's an accidental blessing. It's just a lot of things were bound up muscle-wise in ways that it's taken time. And just Peloton, nothing flash, just online yoga. Me and Anna Greenberg in the mornings. That like whiskey woman who can do things that I will never do. Yoga in a way is a masterclass in learning how to fail on a daily basis.
Kevin, are there any questions online people want to?
That's a good question, Winston. I was just checking, and there are no questions online except I see you're recording this. I'm going to watch this again.
Oh, sweet.
I've got a question. Lia, what's your daily caloric intake? And what kind of food do you eat? And where do you store it all on board?
Okay, we'll begin the frequently asked questions. Excellent stuff. So food was, I budgeted for 5,500 calories, and it's really good I did because I couldn't eat that much. And that meant that I had packed food for 75 days. It took 87, but I actually had 20 days left at the end. So that was a huge thing. It was a great mistake to have made.
Yes.
Packed too much food.
Absolutely.
But having spent 4 years training for this, I have got it down to a science of what will I eat, what does my body want, what does it need. And I lost a mere 3.5 pounds, which is a huge win, but slightly depressing somehow or other. Because my friends had decided what clothing I would wear on arrival, and obviously thought I was going to be thinner. So it's like, I still don't fit in those pants. I did in 2016 before I started, weightlifting for this project, but that's, not going to happen. And people go, well, you look really good, I have belly fat still, like, this is wrong. In fact, I gained 1% fat mass. I gained fat. Oh, yeah, I think that's from all the chocolate. Core things, the main saviour was something called Huel. And Huel is a powdered food, and it's about 400 calories powder, and you add water. It doesn't sound very nice, but you can eat it while rowing. Game changer. You can basically turn your liquid hydration into food that is such a winner for this kind of thing. And so 3 of my meals a day were basically eating on the job of rowing. And then I would have one freeze-dried meal in the evening, which I would lace with oil. It's basically a vehicle for oil. And chocolate, although halfway through you're like licking your chocolate. It's like a puddle. Even at night it is like solidified chocolate, but it's still like a puddle. It's just too hot for chocolate.
How many hours a day did you sleep?
I slept the hours of darkness. So I rowed from pre-sunrise to sunset, which averaged about 9 hours of rowing a day.
And would you get blown off course?
Yes. Yeah. But towards the end, because I was adding water to the boat, which is some kind of bizarre threshold that you have to get over, you know. We have boats, right? So we're like, keep water out of boats, so put water in boats is a bizarre concept. But after, you know, I got it down to an art of where the ballast should be, and at night I would just roll tack myself. I would be like, put boats off course, roll to the right. Okay, that's of course splurge, and then roll to the right, or stack myself to. End up thinking of myself as ballast, which is an interesting thing. But it's going to change the boat that we design. I'm so much better informed after that trip, having gone upside down, having water ballast for the boat that we'll design. And the difference between the boat that I need for the North Pacific is stability. So most boats are designed to self-right in this instance. So they go 0 to 180 and back again. But really, we need a boat that's designed to roll. So it doesn't hang on that precariousness of that. But if you design a boat to roll, you end up like the Coast Guard cutters, sometimes a little too top-heavy. Then they want to roll. So it's a really tricky thing.
So how much was that boat weigh, empty?
I left with 1,300 pounds all in. So it's about 750 pounds of the boat. But the location of the weight is also critical. And over the years, the 4 years that I've been training, we have changed things incrementally, and that mattered. So batteries went from AGM to lithium, water maker got downsized, then located slightly different, and over time that ended up with me rolling over.
Can you use a keel? Can you have a keel?
I had a skate.
A skate, but not a waist.
No. So the new design would probably have a centerboard and a rudder.
Yeah.
With more of a soap dish at the bottom. So you make up for it that way. I don't know, it's going to be interesting to design. In fact, I signed a contract this morning for the design. Yeah. Oh, and we also signed the music this morning for the film, which felt critical, because that film so hangs on that music.
The music is important. It's super important.
Do you sleep better now?
I didn't sleep badly, actually, at sea. Because that's another thing of going into sort of high performance athlete world, is realizing that the human growth hormone is released a couple of hours after you go to sleep. So the importance of going to bed at the same time is strangely important. So if you can sleep the hours of night, then your body can recover better. So I would sleep at night and then have a nap. So the sleep, I didn't really suffer from that. The main thing that I suffered was my body just wouldn't get out of survival mode. And by November that became critical. You know, everything felt like high alert. And that's taken a lot of yoga. Well, me and Anna Greenberg, the willowy woman who would do things I cannot.
A couple of minutes ago you said that you turned into your own boat's ballast. I think what you meant is you actually went full circle because you started as a ballast on a boat, right? And now you were a ballast again in your own boat crossing the Atlantic. Kind of cool.
True, that's true, yes. As my beginning of my career was ballast, my sandwich maker and ballast.
Exactly.
You're right. Thank you very much. Thank you for connecting the dots.
One sentence for your book.
You also spent time on that trip over where you'd row all day and all night you'd lose it again with the currents. There were days that were like just and that had to have an emotional toll as well. Making progress and then losing it all back and forth.
It did, but I dealt with it quite well, I think.
For
We
sure.
row all day, all the miles go overnight. We row all day. It felt like some cruel turn of, challenge of human spirit, that I must endure this. It was one of my fears about this whole trip was that you would row and then you lose it all.
Well, it's like Odysseus's wife, Penelope, right? She knits all day and then unravels it over the night, right?
That's
I
a
mean,
good reference to it. Yeah. But bear in mind that most people who are following are also locked at home. So, I was going through this battle at sea and going through it all, and it was gaining, it sort of resonated with a lot of people because of that. It was very timely.
Well, it's rhythmic, right? I mean, life pulses. Life, you sort of expand and contract, and so the rowing all day and then losing the ground is kind of that same cadence.
As long as you don't starve in the process.
That's right. That would be a bummer.
And fishing was a problem because you think that you want to, apart from sharks, but you think you want to fish, but then when you see the fish, they are so beautiful, and they're amazing, and they're entertainment, they're friends. It's like, oh, food. Yeah, it's a problem. You'd have to be hungry to want to fish, I think, if you're alone on the boat. Yeah.
Did you get sick while you were gone?
Seasick?
No, any kind of sick.
No. I mean, after the first capsize, I had some stomach upsets, which was more to do with the trauma of being upended.
Did you encounter other sailors out there?
I did not. 3 hours after the first capsize, a warship turned up, and that was very confusing because I immediately thought, has one of my rescue beacons gone off? Has my EPUB set off? Which then I asked them, and then they said, "Do you need rescuing?" We had this bizarre exchange.
Are you going to change the name on your AIS from what you had it?
So Winston's referring to the Portland trip where I had named the boat Rowboat. I thought, let's broadcast this. Let's make it loud and clear that I am slow and powered by oars. This backfired horribly. Because there is nothing going on in Oregon. I mean, you know that already because you live in California, but in the Oregon waters there is fishermen and commercial ships and nobody else. And so they see Rowboat and they're like, let's go check it out. And then you have a commercial ship bearing down on you, and you go, you are bearing down on me. And you go, and I go, what happened? We were going to pass on the AIS. And you go, yeah, but we don't see much. He literally said this, we don't see much out here. And they go, but you're bearing down on me, but we haven't seen you yet. And I'm like, oh my God, you're going to run me over in a minute. Cruise ship stopped and turned around for the same reason. By then I was well versed in this. We'd had a helicopter, we had 2 fishing trawlers, we had the commercial ship. There was 7 in the end. 7 ships delivered. Even an aircraft carrier. I went through a storm and there's a couple of things. It's an aircraft carrier. But the cruise ship, when it stopped, I was like, uh-oh, no, don't. I was like talking to it, going, no, keep going, Okay, and then I get on the radio, and now I'm well versed. And I go, yep, and he goes, sorry, where are you coming from? I go, Portland. He goes, where? The Golden Gate Bridge. And I go, so, what? And I go, I have a website, learow.com, Ralph, Romeo, Oscar, Whiskey. And I think, can't believe I'm promoting my website via VHF. And then he was broadcasting it to the passengers, and I actually picked up some more people on my Believer platform. They're like, we followed you, we were on this cruise ship, we couldn't believe it. And I'm going, okay, don't tell me what you ate. I don't want to know. Yeah, that's, as you can see, there are so many films in this in ways. So, each step of the way we make a film.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you for being my first audience in this year and last year.
We're
Wow.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Fantastic
Thank you.
story.
You're
Thank you, Lia.
inspiring.
Yes, totally.
Thank you. And I have some key rings of my boat. If anyone would like one, $20. They have a little rowboat key ring. All the
And
slices.
did you have, you had a cover, didn't
Open
you?
the camera.
No, a hat. A sun hat.
You didn't have any kind of covering at all?
On the boat? No.
On the boat? No.
Just a sun hat.
Really? Wow.
So certainly on behalf of the club, I have to say that I think we have another first. I think you're going to be the most popular speaker that we've ever had here at the club at West Point. So thank you so much for coming. It's a remarkable achievement. I do have a question for you though, which is, do you consider yourself a rower, a sailor, or a stink potter like I am?
Or an artist?
Or an artist, yeah.
I don't know. You know, I have become the rower. I go to friends' houses and this is the rower. Have you met the rower? And I'm like, okay. And I wrote a blog about this a while ago, and I'm like, at what point did I stop becoming a sailor and start becoming a rower? You know. And I have people every now and then going, well, can I tell you about the tides? You know. And then they Wikipedia me, and then they feel embarrassed, and I'm like, I'm trying not to. I like boats. I think that's why I'm able to go from multi-hulls to sailing boats to power boats, expedition boats, because fundamentally I love boats. I see them as sculptures, as passports to adventure, as something that embodies our dreams. I like sitting on them. I like bicycling around boatyards and looking up at the hulks and imagining where you can go. I just like boats, I think. I refuse to be defined. So there you go.
Somebody told me that British people have salt water in their veins. I think that's clearly true. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm a psychologist, so I'm always curious about like.
You should come up here.
How
and
did you
explain
get?
all of
How
this?
did you get this way? Right? Like, what were the things? You know, your courage and your resiliency is, you know, obvious. But I'm always curious, like, how do you end up living this particular dream and not doing something else? What is it in your family system? And maybe you can't answer any of that, and that's okay. But those are the questions that I have.
I think in the book I'm going to explain a little bit more of that.
I think it would.
But I'm a total alien in my family. I mean, even my mother goes, "Can I see your muscles?" My father used to try and get out of sports day at school. You know, I'm not come from an athletic family at all. My mother gets horribly seasick, so does my brother. And I'm a total alien. You know?
I mean, my
parents
theory.
go, "How did we end up with this child? Is it ours?" You know?
Yeah. My theory is always, if I watch the movie of your life frame by frame, I would know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. You know, I mean, it would make, there's a kind of internal consistency to it. And so I'm just, so yeah, answer it in your book. I'll read your book, right?
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Yes.